let me invite Derrick over here, and we'll go ahead and talk about what we're presenting as an alternative exit and build strategy, exiting the systems, buying land, building community, exiting the banks. Here, you can sit in this chair right over here, my friend. Exit the banks, exit all of it, and live the good life. How the heck are you there, Mr. Derrick?
I'm doing good, brother.
What's going on, man? What's new?
Oh, just spending time in Texas for a little while, going back to Mexico soon. And yeah, like you're picking up there, just watching the insanity get more insane. I mean, that's always election time is always a great time to keep people divided and, arguing with each other and propaganda high. But as I was actually talking to our friend Alex Zek a moment ago, and then talked to David Icke a couple weeks ago, and it seems like everybody who's been around a little bit longer to have some critical thinking skills still can see and feel the propaganda that appears to be at some sort of new fever pitch, all-time high, like to, as you were just saying a moment ago, to push people, well-intentioned, freedom-minded people that we know and care about towards Trump as if that's the one, that's the one way that we're going to get out of this. Otherwise, it's totally communism, the end of the world. And for me, this is part of the propaganda to speak about the election in apocalyptic terms, which they always do. Like, it seems increasing. This is the most important election, but specifically that, like, telling people, like, the way that Elon and others have embraced this thing of, like, if Trump doesn't win, it's the end of America.
It's the last election ever.
This is exactly.
And the other side saying the same
exactly
thing.
So it's just to ramp it up and to keep people kind of, I think, in that anxious, fear-based state, which honestly is, as we know, just psychologically, emotionally, if you're in that state of mind, it's hard to think and focus and think straight and think rationally and logically. If you're just in that panic of like, oh my God, is Trump going to win? Or is she going to win? Is it's the end of the world? Is this and that? I think it's by design to keep people in that state. And so they can't have these kind of conversations we're trying to have today. Well, if that's not the best path forward, if playing lesser of two evil games isn't going to get us towards freedom, then what else is there? And if you're not even having that conversation, if you're still just stuck in the various layers of deception in the left-right paradigm of saying, like, okay, well, so then you don't like Trump, so you must like the other side, or so you must be black-pilled, you must just be negative, you just want us to give up, you want us to, all these different responses that I've been seeing, and I'm sure you've come across them as well. To me, it's like, wow, the programming has worked. I can see these same responses, like, you're just negative, you're trying to promote learned helplessness, you must like the other side. Just these sort of things that come up so often that they're just like the talking points that have been seeded into people's minds. And they have these knee-jerk reactions as soon as somebody kind of cracks in through that to pass the illusion, So, yeah, I'm happy we're having this conversation. I'm happy you're putting this energy into it. I've been trying to do the same thing with my 45-day exit and build challenge.
Yep.
Like I mentioned, Alec, we just did a podcast because he feels just as strongly as we do. It was like, hey, we need to get this message out.
He's got a nice way of being like super succinct and potent with these like punchy tweets. So I'm glad that you guys connected on that front.
I mean, it was around this whole conversation here for this specific reason. Like, hey, let's film an
needs to be said
about volunteerism and about, exit build and about looking past the illusion that's being put in front of us again.
You're talking about all these mental strategies, these mental gymnastics that people jump through whenever we're bringing up our position. Like, we got to be aware of Trump and his past record, and not to mention all this deception going on. And people, they immediately throw that out. I believe it's because like the cognitive dissonance is real painful. So can you talk about that, like the spiritual aspect or just the challenge some people have? Because I did a poll earlier on who's voting to just get the tone of the crowd. And it started off with 80% not voting, 20%. But as the numbers kept coming in, it was 50-50. So maybe we could speak to, like, I just really want to encourage people, like, let your guard down. We're all friends. And as I shared, we're all grateful that people care about freedom in the first place, even if they're going to go vote. But you got to be careful because it's really easy to be taken for a ride. And the predator class, they've been doing this for quite some time. They have like think tanks that are dedicated to social engineering. What would you say to the folks that are like, they're kind of on the fence? We followed your work for quite some time. We know that you speak truth to power, but still Trump's our guy. What do you think it's going on in their head, or how can we help to like alleviate that tension that they may be feeling?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of ways to go about that. One of them is, as you said, like kind of maybe from a spiritual, energetic perspective, and I'll speak to that in a moment. The other is, which is maybe the least effective, unfortunately, is just sticking with the facts. Like, I think the facts of looking at Trump's relationships over the years, looking at the actions he did take in his first term, look at what you were just pointing to a moment ago, some of the fascistic tendencies, which do exist. You don't have to be some CNN, MSNBC, Russia to actually look at what Trump calls for to see that like this guy does seem to favor authoritarianism. And I think just kind of on a side here is I think, and maybe this may apply to folks here, maybe not so much this audience, but I think broader on the internet with the broader freedom community, the siloing and the fracturing of the internet has absolutely been successful. So people find their way into pro-Trump media and they just stay in that bubble of listening to those
echo
podcasts.
chamber.
Exactly, echo chambers. And so we're all kind of in our own little bubbles, and each group's thinking they're the freedom movement and they've got the freedom message. And if you only stay in those bubbles, you're going to have your biases confirmed constantly. You're going to just have the same arguments repeated to you over and over, unless it's a type of channel or podcaster or journalist or whatever who does try to present alternative opinions. For the most part, people stick to their lane and their opinions, and they have guests that have similar opinions, and they have that. And we're all guilty of this in different ways. But I personally strive to really try to consume some mainstream corporate media content from left and right, and then look at independent media, and just take from all different sources. I think that's something, as simple as it sounds, that's really lost on much of our movement. The other thing, which is I think more of what we're speaking about today, is like having a true philosophical foundation. So many people woke up during COVID, but they didn't really wake up in terms of discovering voluntarism or discovering libertarianism. They just sort of like, oh, I don't want shots. Vaccines are bad. I don't want lockdowns.
Great Reset's bad.
Exactly. And then sort of, that's the first step. You realize what you don't want. But maybe a lot of these folks haven't put so much time and energy into thinking of what they do want and what does a free society really look like? And what do I think about this concept of freedom? What does that even mean to me? And all these kind of deeper philosophical conversations that I know you've had with yourself as well as other people, myself and others who spent the time going down these rabbit holes. So I was, starting with like hit people with the facts, of course, but at the same time, in many cases, and this isn't every single Trump supporter out there, some who think they're just being pragmatic and they would probably agree with us on 90% of everything and say, yes, I see that, I see that, I see that. And still, he's the lesser of two evils, whatever. But unfortunately, facts don't even really work on some folks at this point. The programming is so strong. And I say that for Harris supporters, Biden supporters, Trump supporters, whatever. And it's been this way for a while. But I definitely think in the case of Trump, the reason I personally am spending so much energy on kind of attacking this is because of what you pointed out a few moments ago, that I do believe this is part of pacifying the resistance. I do believe that these same agendas will be easier under Trump than they would be under Biden or Harris or whatever. Whether that's censorship, but not in the form of, we're going to censor your COVID opinions, but we're going to silence critics of Israel, or we're going to, deport pro-Hamas radicals, or we're going to have the largest deportation operation ever. You don't accomplish that without a massive police state that then allows people to stop and frisk and just question people. There's different
checkpoints on the border,
checkpoints, like all this stuff that if people can look at what does that actually play out in reality, instead of just like, okay, Trump's addressing the things that I think are wrong in the world. We have an immigration issue. Well, Trump's actually dealing with it. Harris won't. And that's true. That's accurate. But look at the way that he wants to approach it, right? And so I think at the end of the day, and this is much of what the Independent Media Alliance has been trying to promote, is like you have these the false binaries that are saying apparently different things, but at the same time leading you to the same direction. One side wants digital IDs. For example, the Biden administration is considering an executive order before they leave, a digital ID thing to prevent Social Security fraud and government fraud. Trump is proposing similar ideas for voter fraud. Well, how are we going to make sure the illegals don't vote? Well, if everybody had a digital ID, we could just keep, so you see the same kind of narrative in the same direction going on, even though from one perspective, they appear to be completely opposite. And I mean, this is nothing new to anybody who's been paying attention. So that's why it's so surprising to me that it's worked so well during the Trump era. But I also think when it comes to that energetic spiritual perspective, that people are desperately looking for solutions. I think they see things getting worse on one end. The left is absolutely insane and crazy, and all these different ways that we could talk about. And so there's a tendency to then, if it's not this side, then it must be the other side. And because the left is, and I say that broadly, of course, there's many leftists who don't align at all with the Democratic Party, and the progressives, they're like, that's not left.
I'd say agorism is leftist, true left.
Yeah,
right?
But you know what I mean? There are people who would say, yeah, I'm a even I'm a democratic socialist, but I don't agree with what these people, they even
I'm
look
like a
at
true
them,
anti-war
they look
person.
at the Democratic Party as being conservative more than anything. They're actually not, right? So, but beyond that, I think the average person though is in this search, looking for truth, looking for answers. But when the bar has been set so low on one side, all Trump has to do is show up and be slightly better, or at least pretend to be slightly
tell some
better.
good jokes.
And make jokes, troll the media. And
I do like
people.
I do like laughing at Trump. He's a funny guy, but
he's definitely not an inspiring person to listen to speak. Like, he's not like Ron Paul getting people riled.
He doesn't motivate people.
He doesn't have any philosophical background.
Person.
He's not talking about principles. He's just
he doesn't have
trolling.
principles.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I get like the general argument that people are looking for something, and they can see that, well, if Harris wins, that it might be really bad in these ways. And I guess my argument is basically, and this isn't a black-pilled sentiment, I think it's just a dealing with the reality that one way or the other, under a Trump administration or a Harris administration, these agendas will move forward. They might look slightly different. They might take different form. And I've heard this sort of self-defense argument. Well, Derrick, yeah, that's true, but maybe the Trump train is going to get us there slightly slower or something like that, right? Okay, I guess you could argue that. But at the end of the day, fine, go ahead then, vote for Trump, but still exit and build. Put your time and energy into these principles. That's why I've been doing the challenges, trying to show people like, when I started, it was 45 days to the election. So the idea was, if you're going to vote on election day, go ahead. But in the meantime, try applying exit and build to your life in these different areas. And at the end, see what actually has brought some value to you, because people will say, I hear you, exit and build. These are some misconceptions I've been hearing. Maybe you've been hearing this. For one, people make this assumption that exit and build somehow means you have to have money, that this is only for rich people or something like that.
I just saw that the other day.
I've seen that come across, and I'm happy to address that. I don't think that's true at all. But the other thing is, people will say, okay, Derrick, but what's going to fix things now? But the reality is nothing's going to fix things now. Like, Trump's not going to fix things now. Voting's not going to fix things now either. But they feel like by doing something, even if it literally just means pressing a button and getting a sticker, that they've done something now. And the idea of it's the generational change is kind of hard for people to take on, because they're like, well, I want to see it now. And I'm like, no, you got to do hard work, and it's going to take time, money, energy. You're going to have to work with other people. You have to change your habits, and you'll see the fruits of your labor later. Or maybe, as we talked about, you won't see it in your lifetime, but that if you don't start now, and we see what's coming, if you choose not to act, then there will not be a potential for an alternative alone for the coming generations and beyond. Because if we do nothing and we're just like, let's keep banging our head against the wall and voting, then we know where things are going to go. You can, okay, maybe Trump will fix it or slow it down. But what if that fails? That's my big thing, is like, at least hedge your bets by starting to put your energy into exit and build. And then I guess one little final point for now is that, like, even if, and this to me is a really important one, is that even if this isn't about exit and build, isn't about preparing for doomsday, running away, giving up, any of these kind of things that I think some people buy into, because they say that they see us saying we're not going to vote. And since they've been programmed to think that's the way you make change, is through voting and through government. So if you're saying you're not going to do that, then obviously you're just giving up, you're running away. But in fact,
false
to me,
dichotomy, like those are the only two choices.
There's another like false binary. To me, it's actually about living closer in line with your values. Because even if I was to wake up tomorrow and finally discover that, you know what, I am a conspiracy theorist, none of this stuff is real, I have just been paranoid. Well, I got land, I'm growing food. Like, my life is still going to be fundamentally better, even if it wasn't for like, hey, because, initially we're all reacting to like the world's getting crazier. So let's try to do something about it. Imagine all that craziness went away. Getting land, living with like-minded people, growing food, having clean water, free-range kids, getting off big tech, preserving your privacy, your liberty. These are all good things either way. So don't think about it in terms of like, the world is going to shit, so I need to hurry up and like run to the hills. Like, take steps that you think will preserve liberty and privacy for you in the long term, and you will come to find out that that's actually a more rewarding way to live. At least that's what I've been my experience.
No, that's good. And I wanted to roll back what we said. Like, you may not ever see benefits from exit and build. You see benefits immediately from growing your own food, from opting out of the pharmaceutical complex, from spending more time with the kids, or whatever it may be. Okay, so earlier, like I shared, we did the poll. 50% of the people are going to vote. 50% are not. And it's my intention with this whole thing. And to be clear, like, vote for nobody. We're trying to be provocative. We're trying to push people to like really reject the system wholeheartedly, practically, philosophically, and spiritually. But let me ask you this, and I'd like to get your take on the nature of the state, because you correctly pointed out, and when we're doing the greater reset, people's reset, we're always conscious of like our audience came at large part after COVID. We saw massive growth in the Freedom Cell Network, massive growth in this whole freedom thing. And we always got to realize, like, not all of them read Murray Rothbard or spent all the time in this liberty movement where 90% of what we did was like philosophize and debate, right? And so the people, 50% voting, 50% not voting, can you kind of just lean in, like, practically, spiritually, and philosophically, why should we not give any credence, even because I do think a lot of the voters have a good point. If they're voting and exiting a building, they're like, look, dude, it takes me like 20 minutes, an hour to go down and vote. And I still got the guard and I still got all this. But like, could you talk about philosophically why we reject the state? What is the state? And why should we just wholeheartedly reject it 100% and not give any credence to it at all? In the form of voting, even if it's a defensive vote, all that stuff.
Yeah, I want to. There's a comment up there I see.
Yeah, go ahead.
Maggie. It says, "Understand your voting statements and agree, but it appears Trump will slow the warmongers and profiteers." And I just want to address that briefly.
Yeah, hit
John, I don't think that that's accurate, Maggie, or anybody else who feels that. I think there's this false meme going around. I mean, I don't think it. I see it. There's a false meme going around that Trump is an anti-war candidate. But in reality,
he didn't start any wars.
Allegedly, he didn't start any wars. He did drop more bombs than Obama, drone bombs than Obama. And a lot of people don't know that, and they ignore that. He bombed
more
Syria,
civilian deaths from those bombs.
And, you know, after Obama killed Anwar al-Awlaki and his son, it was Trump who killed the daughter as well later on in his administration. She was 8 years old, American citizen who was over there. Trump bombed Syria based on false flag gas attacks. I could go on, but also even just let's bring it to current. Listen to Trump's VP candidate, J.D. Vance, and him saying, we're going to hit Iran hard. Look at some campaign ads they put out literally in the last 2 weeks of Trump saying, like, we're going to bomb Iran to defend Israel and this and that, like, peace candidate. I don't see where people see that. And this idea that he's going to prevent, it might be different wars, maybe different wars than she would start or whatever, but I don't think that's accurate. So just wanted to address that. I think that there's something to be said with giving your time, your moral support, your energetic support, spiritual support for systems that we know are corrupted. Now, first off, the argument that it only takes me 10 minutes to vote, guys, all I got to do is go wait in line and I got to press a button. I think that's true on one level, but at the same time, I do think if you're going to be an actually informed voter, even though clearly nobody, you know, it's hard to say nobody's heard of Donald Trump. We pretty much know who he is. People have strong opinions one way or the other. But how many people out there, for example, who are going to support Trump because they think he's a freedom candidate, have actually read the Republican Party platform under Trump? Like just as one example, because I don't think most people actually have. I just did an article last week at the Last American Vagabond called "The Republican Party Platform Under Donald Trump is Pro-Israel and Anti-Free Speech." And there's several lines in there that you can see where they talk about we're going to deport pro-Hamas radicals, which is, you know, how do they interpret that? I don't know. All these different things.
If I was in college, I would have been protesting out there against the Israeli aggression.
I think plenty of good people are. That doesn't mean we have to agree with them on every other topic, but there's good reason to resist and protest the genocides and things going on in Gaza and by Israel's hand. So, but Trump has those lines in there. The reality is, if you are going to be a voter, then be an informed voter. And I don't mean just reading like clips from what Trump claims on social media, but actually maybe visiting his campaign website, looking at his talking points, at least. Not to say those are even going to matter, or they're going to stick by them. But my thing has always been like, sure, it'll take you 20 minutes to vote, but maybe it's a bigger commitment if you're actually an informed voter. If you actually do go out there and try to, okay, I'm going to look past all the BS on the internet. I'm going to look at what Kamala Harris is actually about. What has she actually done? I'm going to look at Trump. What has he actually done? What's his record? What has he promised? And what did he deliver? Like, I think there's more of a time commitment than just that 20 minutes it takes you to go vote.
Good point.
If you're really trying to be an educated voter. Now, some people might not even
We'll
care,
bring you up in a sec, Bradley.
and they're not interested in being that formed a voter. But for those who claim that, I just want to make that point. Now, in terms of the way that John and I understand this institution known as the state, I mean, it is a group of people that at some point in the past came together and claimed monopoly over geographic landmass, and they gave themselves the monopoly on creation of laws, creation of taxation, and enforcing those laws. And over time, we come to know them as government. But it doesn't necessarily mean that we are doing things better than humanity ever could do, or that we're at the pinnacle of humanity. I do think we're still evolving. I think that, you know, in reality too, look at this idea, this concept of liberty. Besides going back to things like Lao Tzu, the idea is 500, 600 years old, really. Like it's still a very, like this is an infancy, and we're fighting to just keep the idea of freedom of speech alive and freedom of, bodily autonomy and self-ownership. These ideas are still.
What are you dating back? Magna Carta or what?
You could say Magna Carta. I think you saw, I made a post yesterday when we were in Fredericksburg. I found this book. I can't remember what it's titled, but it was written by a British author in 1625. And it was like seen as one of the first, at least the first well-known defense of freedom of speech, so let's say 500-600 years or something like that, and then we could say the American experiment, even less, just a couple hundred years, right? So the point is, these are, relatively speaking, in humanity's whole timeline, very young ideas that people have come around to believing that, okay, kings aren't ordained by God and things of that sort. There are clearly still people who would be happy with those kinds of, situations. I think whether it's Trump as God Emperor or whatever the case may be, maybe some people aren't going to evolve to the point of wanting to take care of their own lives and to make their own decisions. But I think for those of us who do and already see, like, hey, I want to pull more in this direction. I want self-ownership. I want to make my own decisions and not be dependent on politicians to save me. Then it's time for us to step up and to claim that and take that action. That, to me, is what Exit and Build is really about. It's about looking at these different areas of your life. I like to try to look at it holistically. You could say food, you could say money, you could say technology, land, education. Start looking at that, what I call a holistic self-assessment, and then look in those areas and see what your weaknesses are, what your vulnerabilities are. Okay, I got $20,000 of college debt. I've got some credit card debt. My money's all in the bank. And then start to make a plan of how you can take steps, like switch from a big bank to a credit union, and start taking these steps to get less and less dependent on these systems. That, to me, is much more valuable, much more rewarding than just putting all your faith into Trump. So yes, you can go vote for Trump or Harris or whoever, but please also put the time and energy that this fight really requires, because I think we are at a crucial, like a cross point here in humanity. Are we going to continue doing the same thing over and over as we see the march towards 2030 and their agenda? And that doesn't mean their agenda is going to be completed exactly as they want and on the days they claim. But we see that there's trillions of dollars, multinational corporations, nearly every government working on this. They just signed the Pact of the Future. They're advancing their agendas. We need to be putting as much time and energy into our agendas. What does our 2030 look like? And we're either going to start doing that now, and I think that's what John and I and others are trying to do, is lay the foundation for whatever these parallel systems might become, or we're going to keep trying the same old tired tactics that haven't gotten us anywhere. And you can think you're awake and still walk right into the FEMA camp. But if you're not dependent on those systems, then you will have a much more easier time to be free from them. I mean, just one last thing. We just came from Denmark, and those folks are already dealing with digital IDs. Like, we were in a room of 60, 70 people who came there to hear me talk about Exit and Build, and they're all interested. But then after a while, it kind of turns just to an open discussion, because they're like, we hear you, but we've already got digital IDs. It's not mandatory, but you can't get a bank account without it. You can't use public transportation without it. You can't pretty much do anything in society without it. So not mandatory, but basically try to function without it. But they still get it. So people are buying land outside of the big city. People are trying to lay the foundation. So even in the face of the digital IDs, people won't give up the humanity. The human spirit still yearns for liberty. And to me though, I go there, I'm like, holy crap, we can never let this happen. Because like, when things are that far along, and I hope and pray for our friends in Denmark to find a way out of that. But if it continues to advance, it will become much more difficult than it already is. Miriam and I were just talking about this on the way up here. Like, even just a regular credit score can be very difficult to function without, if you don't have those.
Yeah, because you're all agorist out. You if you went to go rent just a run-of-the-mill apartment,
me to have all that sort of thing, right? And then if you
that's why it's about who you know and the network.
Exactly. If you don't need their systems, and this is where I guess one of the finer points is that community really is key. This is where freedom cells come in and everything. I'm not a rich person. I couldn't have afforded to buy the land that we have without coming together with a group of people, finding like-minded people, same vision, same principles, pooling our resources to get a piece of property that we can all enjoy the benefits of and still have our own homes and everything, right? There's so much value. The people in Denmark, they're coming together as community because they realize they can't take this all on their own. Like, that is really the key here. We need each other. They want us divided over each other. They want us fighting each other. And that includes people who have different political opinions. I think that the reality is the left and the right both get some things right and some things horribly wrong. There are some left-wingers out there that are probably vaccinated, climate change narrative, but they get the importance of permaculture and growing food. And they get the importance of, decentralization and mutual aid groups. I mean, a lot of people don't realize that's more of a left-leaning kind of value, typically.
Horizontal.
Exactly. And then obviously there's folks on the right, quote unquote, these terms are so, convoluted now, but that get issues in certain
financial
areas.
freedom.
And so to me, we shouldn't be falling into this trap, which is, I think, the broader picture of what's happening is that the freedom-minded people are falling into a trap to think we can only go to the right to work with those people. Yes, there are some areas where the right obviously makes more sense again, but then they are also, the right can be just against free speech like the left can in some cases, Israel and stuff like that. So I think just work with who you can, maybe even prepare yourself to work with people who disagree with you on different topics and focus on where you can. You don't have to discuss every single topic under the sun in order to build a garden together or to learn some new skills together. Doesn't mean you necessarily need to move in with those people or build on land with them, but you can collaborate with people. You can get to know your neighbors. I'm sure there's people here in your local community that you trade and do business with that if you really sat down with it, you guys could find plenty to argue with, but instead, you get eggs from them, or you get,
our neighbor's an older gentleman, veteran, incredible person, Trump signs all up in the front, an Israel flag.
Wow.
And we've talked about Trump and talked about the conspiracy side of stuff briefly, but that's not what it's about. It's about when we had a horse that got hit by a car, he showed up with his tractor, dragged it over his property. It was buried on his property. It's about us going to lunch with them, spending time with them. And we don't even have to bring up the fact that he's got an Israel flag, because there's more important things than our politics. And also, politics just serve to divide people.
Maybe as you build out relationships, not every relationship, but maybe as you build these authentic relationships, an opportunity does present itself to say, hey, can I tell you what I think about it on that topic? Yeah. And then maybe if, both people are emotionally mature and emotionally intelligent,
and if you're already
actually
friends,
have a discussion,
you can have a conversation.
Exactly. So I think that's sort of the other role of politics. I mean, I know you've talked about this before, but just as one brief example, in Cherán in Mexico, one of the places that celebrated their freedom, that was one of the things they first said is that when the political parties came to town, it turned neighbor against neighbor.
Family against family.
We kind of all have grown up with political parties. Political parties been around the U.S. for hundreds of years, but in rural parts of Mexico, there are areas that didn't start getting campaigns visiting till the last few decades. And they could see the difference of how their communities were united and working together. Yeah. And then the political parties came and all of a sudden you're red and I'm blue and we can't get along anymore.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why they have checkpoints on the outside of town. And one of the things they're checking for, in addition to gang members, which they threw out along with the municipal government, is political signs and bumper stickers. I put Derrick Broze TCRN up there. It stands for the Conscious Resistance Network. Janice was backing up. That's Derrick's website. Excellent journalism there. Okay, let me ask you this, because you brought up Denmark. We were just in Bath for the People's Reset. Incredible event. The technocracy and tyranny is far advanced in the European Union. So for those of you that live in the United States, well, depending on where you live. If you live in Texas, consider yourself blessed. Even in California, it's not as bad as it is in London, for example. But let me ask you this, and this is an insight that I had, and it was largely informed by a lot of the work that you've done, your journalism with Last American Vagabond, these articles you've been putting out. The way that I see it is, if Kamala gets elected, we're going to see the advancement of this deep state agenda, which largely mirrors what's already taken place and happening in the European Union. Censorship, all this weird gender stuff where you can't say anything, you can't misgender someone, hardcore surveillance, digital ID. And it's largely being pushed through government, through their EU, and then also through their government and local governments. The shift that I see, if Trump gets in office, the agenda will still advance, but it'll be more of a corporate elements of big tech. So it'll be more like a business thing. And can you hit on digital ID and then maybe especially central bank digital currencies? Because a lot of people are like, he said he's against CBDCs, but there's some really key insights that of your journalism uncovered.
There's other ways they can achieve the same goal. Yeah, and to the point about the Trump side of things, this goes back to, of course, we're talking about voluntarism, which is overlapped and connected to the libertarian philosophy. For one, that word, as you know, has been so bastardized in the media that people who hear it think it just means you love corporations, right? And I don't think it's doing libertarianism. Yeah. And I don't think we're gaining any points lately when people like Peter Thiel, Mark Zuckerberg are like, oh, I'm libertarian now. To me, and that might be a purposeful thing to sort of diminish the idea in people's head or to associate it with negative individuals who people can clearly see, like this person's doing some bad things and now they're a libertarian. Well, if that's what libertarianism means, I don't want to have anything to do with that. Yep. When they're the farthest thing from it. I mean, these are people who get government subsidies and their whole wealth is based on government contracts. So I think that's one part of this element here, is this negative association with libertarianism. But I absolutely think you're right with Trump that ultimately, these are just different flavors. The direction we're headed in my view, is clearly technocracy. And for those who are not familiar with that definition, I mean, it's just a political philosophy that says that we should get rid of voting. We should get rid of, democracy and all these sort of things because the people are too dumb to know what's good for them. We should also not sort of support the capitalist class per se, but instead we should lean on the scientific and technocratic or in the technological experts or the elite. And in the original dreaming up of this philosophy in the 1920s and 1930s in the US, they were talking about, the terminology they had then was the machine. So they said the technate king would oversee the machines, and these machines would create basically a social utopia that would dictate, okay, this village needs this much resources, this one needs this. We had energy certificates. Like, it described a lot of what we're seeing. That's where I think things are ultimately headed. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not different flavors and different paths to get us there. So one might look like what you're describing under a Biden or a Harris administration, where it is more governmentally driven that way, using hate speech laws and this other stuff to get us to censorship, to get us towards digital IDs. But as you also pointed out, on the Trump side of things, it might be more the business class helping drive things. Ultimately, though, we're going in the same direction. We're still getting that same direction. And Trump clearly is more aligned with business, obviously coming out of a business background, and he, has this alleged record of, being a great deal maker and all this kind of stuff. I do think that what you said is spot on, that we will see the same agendas driven, but it will be Elon Musk is going to play a big role. Peter Thiel is going to play a big role. And some other folks, one of Trump's biggest donors, of course, the Adelson family, formerly Sheldon Adelson, now his wife Miriam Adelson. They're huge Zionist billionaires. But at the end of the day, you mentioned digital IDs, CBDCs. Again, we kind of touched on the digital ID part earlier. One side says we need some way to fight illegal immigration, to fight voter fraud. Well, one thing that has been proposed is a digital ID to do that, a new voter ID. And for those who've been following along, they're already rolling these things out. They've been trying since 9/11 with the Real ID Act, which is allegedly, supposedly, finally going to be implemented. But even if they don't, they've already got what they're calling mobile driver's licenses or digital driver's licenses, where they're getting people to do it on their phone. That's something that passed under Trump's administration. Again, the baton gets passed from one administration to the other, one side to the other, but they keep advancing the agenda.
Yeah, they never roll it back.
They don't. Like, if they really wanted to, then Obama would have investigated Bush's crimes, but instead he's like, we're not going to look back. Trump would have done the same thing, but
Trump
instead
would have arrested Hillary.
But it's time to focus forward now, right? That's always the mantra. So we can see the same agendas being pushed forward. Now, in terms of the CBDCs, Trump did say at the Bitcoin Nashville conference, and I think a few other times, that he won't implement CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. Now, that could just be, as usual, a politician running a campaign and making promises. Who knows if those are going to play out or not? But let's imagine he does keep his promise and he doesn't roll out CBDCs. Well, we've seen through the work of my colleague Whitney Webb and Mark Godwin, who've been doing amazing work on this, looking at some of the plans of the players, many who are connected to the Bilderberg Group through Blockstream and other companies, who have infiltrated the crypto space, the Bitcoin space. Those people are also promoting stable coins through things like Tether. So you might not end up with a CBDCs per se in the US. It might be different. It might be a stable coin, either in the form of Bitcoin or something alongside Bitcoin. But the point is, people will still be corralled into something that can be tracked and traced. So, technically it's not a CBDC, but it's the same thing.
He was talking about dollar-backed stable coins.
Yeah, exactly.
And one of the key stable coins, the most prominent one, is Tether.
Yeah.
Which is an Ethereum token, and they can shut off people's access.
Absolutely.
They've worked with the federal government to do just that. So
it would achieve
the same damn
goal,
thing. Totally tracked and
Trump
totally
keeps his
censorable.
promise, no CBDCs, but stable coins that achieve the same goal. Right?
And then the big challenge, because I like to say Trump will have slightly more tolerable government, but like you pointed out, the freedom community in large part will be more pacified, and
Absolutely.
They may be more willing to accept something because they've put so much faith and trust in this guy.
Yeah, and I think that is really what I do worry about.
That's the worry.
So I get this common refrain, which again, to me, people who have this level of thinking is just, you're still kind of existing for one reason or another in a very like a binary way of like, oh, Derrick said something negative about Trump, so let me guess, you want Harris in office, that sort of thing. It's like, okay, like that's where you're at. We're probably not going to get very far. But even that sort of sentiment, I think it doesn't really see that the reason we're talking about Trump tonight and not so much focus on Harris is because I would guess out of all of your viewers and all of my viewers across the platforms, I think I've heard one or two maybe say that they're going to support Harris. The vast majority in the broader freedom movement are falling for the Trump deception.
Well, let's do a poll because I get the same pushback, and I actually have it.
Mike, is anybody here actually interested in Harris?
Yeah,
or if
we're
going to
do a
vote,
poll.
are you going towards
Because
Trump?
50%, we got about 214 people. So over 100 people are planning on voting. If you are voting, who for? So we'll put the Trumpster. And that's why they're like, you have Trump derangement system.
God.
Why don't you say? And I'm like, because our crew knows that they see through her. They're not drinking her Kool-Aid.
There's nobody that's like drinking the Harris Kool-Aid and all of a sudden thinks she's going to be the greatest thing. But there are Trump people who are making plenty of excuses. And like you said, with the Trump derangement syndrome, this is one of the worst things to me. And I think, again, this was another kind of powerful meme that was seeded into people's
polls live.
minds.
Let's see if you're voting. Who are you voting for? But go ahead.
Like seeded into people's mind that if you basically you can't be critical of the thing without having, you must believe in the other side, right? Or you must have Trump derangement syndrome. That to me was such a powerful tool because what it does is it shuts down critical thinking.
Yep.
Instead of actually looking at the facts of what I'm illustrating, I posted one of my articles today on Twitter from a couple years ago, Dear Freedom Movement, Trump is not a friend of liberty, with examples of things he said and things he's done. How many of Trump supporters will actually contend with the article? In my experience, not very many of them. They don't even bother reading it. Oh, TDS, this and that. And when you try to have a rational discussion, sure, there might be some, but for the most part, that's just a way to say you're a crazy person. It's the same thing that people do with conspiracy theorists,
Nazi,
whatever. These kind of terms that just immediately shut down critical thinking.
All right, here's the poll.
You have TDS. I don't need to actually look at what you're saying.
Yep, it's a cop out. 64% Trump, 8% Kamala. So that's a good 10 people or so. Kamala. I'm surprised by that.
Third
party, Green or Libertarian parties. Chase Oliver guy who's all COVID stuff.
So look at that. Like the numbers show themselves. The majority of the freedom-minded people are going third party or Trump.
Yep.
A very tiny percentage are going Kamala. So just to kind of address that point, there's not as much of a need to sit here and we could point out 100 different things about Kamala and Biden, and that's fine. And I've reported on those things. There's, nobody's trying to deny those things. But the moment I see the freedom movement rallying behind Kamala, then I'll focus on her. But instead, that's not what's happening. And because I see how many excuses people are already making, and they are this is the other convenient one. Well, he was duped the first time he was in office. He didn't know, he didn't have enough experience. And he got deceived by the deep state. So in some cases, he's all powerful, all knowing. In other cases, he's making mistakes. People are fooling him. You can't have it both ways.
It's 4D chess.
Yeah. And so I think that's a big problem is that if we can let's just be adults. If you are the kind of person that says I hear you guys, I'm with you. And I know it's evil. It's lesser evil in your mind, allegedly. I don't even know if that's true. If he is a lesser evil than her, I don't know. Then that's fine, but still consider exit and build. For me, though, participating in these systems, reducing myself down to a level of having to support people who are Zionists across the board, RFK Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, Trump, obviously, the people behind him, including Peter Thiel, and Harris, the same people. Both of them got steering committee members of the Bilderberg Group. On Harris's side, you've got Alex Karp, who's a co-founder of Palantir.
Will you share what the Bilderberg Group is real quick?
So the Bilderberg Group is a group that's been meeting originally in secret in the early 1950s. We actually don't even know their name, if they even have a name, but they've been given the name the Bilderberg Group for decades because that was the first hotel they met at. And for years, really up until the last decade, I'd say, people like, was it Jim Tucker and then Alex Jones were some of the earliest people talking about him, and in different activists. Daniel Eshlein, he wrote one of the big books on it, and different activists started showing up, learning the locations of where they were allegedly going to be, and starting to confront them. So over the last decade, it went from being the Bilderberg Group is a whispered thing, the mainstream sort of makes fun of it, to now there's a few articles about it. They had to actually create a public website, bilderberg.org, where they do post their meetings. They put a list of people who attend, and they put like a little super vague general list of terms that they, Russia, Iran, whatever. And they've had to do that just because people pushed it out into the mainstream. But the point is, a lot of people look at the Bilderberg Group and whoever they truly represent. You've had folks like Henry Kissinger involved deeply all the way to the end of his life, that they are at least a public face of the true ruling class and the business interests, because you have politicians, you got bankers, you've got people from academia, from media, all over the place coming together, and it's all off the record. And then they go back to their various spheres of influence around the world, and they implement the policies and things they've talked about. So for years, the Bilderberg Group was seen as a conspiracy. Now it's more open, and you have, in terms of the Bilderberg Group, they invite people every year, but there is a steering committee of people. And on that steering committee of people, on the Harris side, you got her backed by Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google. You got Alex Karp, who's a co-founder of Palantir, who's backing Harris. And Bill Gates recently. He's not a Bilderberg member, but he's another technocrat. He just announced he's giving $50 million to Kamala. Then on the other side, you got Peter Thiel, also steering committee member of the Bilderberg Group, co-founder of Palantir with Alex Karp. So 2 co-founders of Palantir on both sides of the election. And then obviously Peter Thiel has funded J.D. Vance's rise and funded Trump for several years now.
Did you explain Palantir, the significance of
Palantir,
that? Because that comes back to surveillance.
Palantir is a huge surveillance firm. They are, quote unquote, a private surveillance firm. And I say that in quotes because the overlap between them and government is so tenuous that it's hard to really know, right? If they're essentially a private government agency, they received initial funding from NQTEL, which is the CIA's venture capital firm. And
that also funded Facebook.
They also helped fund Facebook. And of course, Peter Thiel, PayPal, so many different connections and this whole apparatus. And again, he's another person who tries to proclaim he's a radical libertarian or something like this. They don't mean the same thing that we do here. So the point is, when you look at the reality of the playing field, and you got Zionist funding on both sides, deep in the pockets of the Zionists. You got Bilderberg steering committee members on both sides of this thing. You got technocrats on both sides funding it. And if you take that all at face value, then at best, the billionaire technocrat class is at war with each other, and we can choose over which slave master we want, right?
At best.
If you even believe that that's the true narrative. I tend to be skeptical of I don't think that they're all 100% lock and step on every single decision, but I do think at the end of the day, they'll side with each other over us any day of the week. So at best, the public face is the technocrat billionaires are at war with each other. Choose your favorite. Maybe another layer is that there is no conflict and they are all working together in this false dialectic to push us further down the narrative, and that Trump has been put in that position, which is what I've argued since the beginning, to play this anti-establishment hero that will pacify the masses who, in terms of conservatives, would stand up. If these quotes that we see from Trump and the calls for authoritarianism and retribution and I'll be a dictator only for one day and these kind of things, if they were coming out of the mouth of Obama or Biden or Harris, people would be losing their minds, and rightfully so.
Yeah. I noticed our people give him the benefit of the doubt, but no other politician.
Exactly. They're always willing to kind of make excuses for Trump, or they're just saying that's deep state people just turning against him. Yeah. So everything good, only Trump can only do good, and any criticism of him are TDS and things of that sort. So hopefully people can see through some of the chaos and see that more than ever, it's important for us to focus on solutions.
Come on. Okay. All right. Before we let you go, because we got Bradley Logan, and thanks for coming by here in studio. Share, because I'm going to talk about, in a second, I'm going to talk about exit and build as a household strategy, but also how we can come together, because people are seeing Trump's going to save wholesale, but it's like we're doing the small stuff with the garden stuff. But no, if we can unite, I mean, the Freedom Cell Network has 40,000 people registered. You're going to Denmark randomly, short notice, 60, 70 people show up. Tons of people show up in London. This is a global movement we have.
Absolutely.
If we can get even 5% is organized as the New World Order, the predator class. And if we can have the right strategy, which we strongly believe exit and build is that strategy, I think it's going to take some time, but in a matter of decades, maybe less, maybe longer, maybe generations, we could see like a true environment where we can self-govern. We're going to talk about those strategies, and I strongly believe living in community outside of the city has a big role. So to kind of parlay into the conversation we're going to have with Bradley, can you talk about the intentional community you're building? And I understand y'all are doing like a civil association.
Yeah, we're working on some different ideas. Yeah, thanks again for having me, John, and for organizing this. This is such an important conversation for people to be having, and I'm glad to see you've got people tuned in tonight, because this is probably one of the most important things we need to be contending with right now is, not falling for false solutions. I do think that the key is to come together in community. I tend to think that the outside of the big cities is where the safety will be in the long term. But even if you're living in a suburb on the edge of town, or you are deep in the city, like I grew up in Houston, in the city, in downtown, and spending so much time there. And I love it for different reasons, but I also recognize that it's an unsustainable long-term move to make. And I need something better. For us, Mexico is somewhere that we had been leaning towards living for years before COVID. And when COVID came along, we decided let's just accelerate our plans and move faster. And we ended up finding some land in central Mexico. As I shared earlier, I didn't have the money to be able to do this on my own. So we had to come together with like-minded people. And that was it's an ongoing process, but it's been a 3-year robust process of developing our conflict resolution, decision-making agreements, our entry and exit agreements. How do people come into the group? How do they leave? Of course, just spending the most time on really fully fleshing out the principles and the value. I shared earlier that our community was founded on individual liberty, permaculture principles, and mindfulness. And then from there, we go into things like off-grid, natural building. We believe in self-defense. And we had a lot of conversations about this. And this started with hundreds of emails of interested people, down to 50 people, starting with biweekly meetings in September 2020, down to 30 and then 20. And then when we actually signed for the property and put the money down last April, it was 4 households. And now we're working on adding another 4 to 5, 6 households. We're aiming for a freedom cell of basically 8 to 10 households to start with, and probably more in the future. And to me, this is, as I was kind of hinting at earlier, like even if all the crazy, scary things in the world went away, to me, this is just the kind of life that I want to live and move towards. And I think that more and more of us out there who know that we see bad things in the world and things that don't look conducive to liberty and freedom and privacy in the long term, especially for us and our children and grandchildren and so on, those to come after us. If we see that, we need to also be proactive and forward thinking, not so much just focused on what the Klaus Schwabs of the world are doing and the Bill Gates of the world are doing, and what their agenda 2030 is, but what is your agenda 2030? So we spend a lot of time concretely planning this out, as well as I think there's something to be said energetically, spiritually, for putting this down on paper. And I mean, like, you know, I'm tend to be more oriented with words, so I write things down. But Miriam and I have created vision boards for our community, you know, writing that, like drawing little pictures of what do we actually want it to look like. And I think that gives it power. It comes out of your mind and
Let
your
me
heart.
hit this poll while you're doing that, and I'll let you finish there. Do you have specific exit and build goals that you've written down and are actively working towards? So be honest with us, guys. I'm talking specific concrete goals, not just like, yeah, we want to do this and that. And you got them written down because, like Derrick said, it makes a key difference if you write them down. Let's launch the poll.
Write it down. You know, like, again, if you're artistically inclined, draw pictures of what that looks like for you. I think all these things can really help you. And I was outlining earlier, try to think of this holistically. Take one topic at a time, your money situation, your food situation, etc. And where's your current situation? I'm 100% dependent on the grocery store at the moment, not growing anything.
Yeah, be real with yourself.
Don't go to farmers markets. I've never been to a community farm. Okay, well, step one, visit the farmers market this weekend. This is Thursday. We're recording this, right? So you got farmers market probably in your area. Go meet there. Go find the people who have the produce, the eggs, whatever it is you eat. Talk to the farmers, get to know them. Go visit the place if you can. This stuff takes time, energy, investment. It's really an investment. Freedom isn't going to be handed to you. And I think that's a big thing for people to overcome as well, past the idea that we're going to get there with just pressing a button. So put time and energy into really understanding what your exit and build goals are, to really seeing what does your 2030 and beyond look like. I'll just mention this and I'll sign off here. But I did an article, sort of more of an essay a couple of years ago called Welcome to 2030. I own land, live amongst like-minded people, and life has never been better. And there was a play, obviously, on the World Economic Forum's essay from 2016, which is actually written by a politician from Denmark, so they know it very well over there, where hers was Welcome to 2030. I have no privacy. I own nothing. Life has never been happier. And she describes that future that we've all heard of, the you will own nothing and be miserable thing. And we've talked about this too, but even about 3/4 of the way through there, they do acknowledge, though, sometimes I think of the people we left behind, the people who technology moved too fast for them, or they didn't like political changes, and now they live outside of the cities in these 19th century buildings, et cetera. And so even then, the World Economic Forum, these groups sort of acknowledge that some people are going to kind of break away and do their own things. It doesn't mean we should necessarily count on their kindness per se, but I do think even they acknowledge that not everybody is going to be swept into this, and that some people will focus on building alternatives outside that. So I share that to say, work on your 2030 vision. What is your welcome to 2030? What does that look like for you? Is it living amongst like-minded people with free-range kids and organic, clean food and clean water and clean air, permaculture houses, Adobe, super Adobe, really put some thought, time, and energy, describe like what is that experience of waking up in the morning and walking around that whatever. And again, like some of you might not want to move to the countryside, but even if you're just talking about getting to the suburbs and living near like-minded friends, or even if you do feel like you want to stay in the city and try to stick it out, I don't think that will be safe long-term, but you definitely need to be oriented with community then if you're going to stay in the city. You need to find like-minded people that you can at least collaborate on, you can build a community garden with and start taking steps in these directions. The reality is that each of us can implement these ideas one way or the other, no matter your living situation. It's going to look different person to person, but I absolutely believe that it's something that can apply to all living situations. You don't have to be rich to do these things. I'm not rich. There's nothing wrong with money. There's nothing wrong with, wanting to elevate your financial living standards, because that's another big part of this, changing our mindset around money, because this stuff does take time, money, energy. But you don't have to be rich in order to work with other people to get yourself towards the goals that you want to do.
Yeah. And you pointed out, and it really spoke to me, in where we're going with these exit and build goals and this movement, what's more valuable than money is having credibility, being somebody that shows up for other people, because there's a reciprocal element to all of that. And so you have a reputation for showing up, for leading, for doing good by other people. And that's how you're able to attract these other folks and make things happen. It wasn't because you had this long career and you got all this money from your corporate job or whatever to just plop the down payment.
It's that social capital.
That's right. The social capital is way more valuable than dollars that are losing their value. Good stuff. All right. Hey, well, thanks, brother.
Yeah, thanks.
Appreciate you, man. Yeah, good stuff.
See you soon, Bradley. Thank you, everybody. See you guys. Check me out at theconsciousresistance.com.
Consciousresistance.com. I shared it up there a second ago.